Okay, now we're recording, I think. Eric, we're so excited to talk to you. It really is, it's really, for me personally, very, very exciting because I feel like you are working in things and you're thinking in ways very similar to us. And I don't know, we're just like going into blockchain, like it's just calling into Holochain, I'm sorry. It's like calling us. And the more we know, the more we talk to the community, the more we feel that is really aligned. So, I'm particularly excited about a few things, but yeah, so I think you know enough about our community. I distributed a couple of, you write up on Sin and also a video. I think we know also enough. And so if you just want to, decide, it's just that. I mean, I could show you stuff, but I'm curious about what you think first in general.
Well, I kind of feel very similarly. When I read your paper, when I was first looking at NFTs and going, what the heck? And then I saw what you guys were doing. I'm like, okay, yeah, I get it. And I get the way this needs to go. And the level of consciousness that I saw in there and a bunch of the cool things you're doing, I signed on to to your actual website with the drawings and just really enjoyed it.
Really?
There's a kind of heart that feels really right on. And I don't know, I've always had this suspicion that the place where big things will land is either in the arts or gaming, or it'll come in perpendicularly in some kind of orthogonal way. And so I have no agenda. I'm here to be of service and listen to what you all have. I'm happy to answer any questions you have, and I'm sure I'll have questions as the conversation develops. And of course, that your video that you posted, that you went right to the section on the undo trees in Emacs as an example, made me doubly happy, because that is like a core example of what I think is needed. So it's really cool.
Yeah, so I mean, I can give a little bit of context and then let everybody else jump in. But one thing that since first of all, everything that we do is based on our own dynamics. We don't work from theory. We actually, it's mostly observation. And so we see what emerges and protect what we value, and try to change the things that we don't, try to figure out ways of not, like, I don't know, like, for things that we don't like, for them not to emerge, instead of blocking them or sanction them or anything like that. It's more like, naturally come in and really see that if the environment that we're creating is the things that we want are emerging, that's enough, and it in itself will be strong enough and resilient enough to sort of have those boundaries, right? And so we strongly believe in that. And then since we've been creating the visible economy, we realized that it wasn't just the platform, the way the platform was designed, or the fact that we were creating art, or the fact that we were collaborating. It was beyond that, because if we feel the same way in these sessions, we feel the same way in Telegram. We still don't have trolls or conflicts or things like that, and we're still very open. So one of the things that I think it's like, to me, exciting about the work that you're doing, I mean, Holochain in general, but specifically the work in collaboration that you're doing, is that it sort of felt that even when we talk about governance, about the way we make decisions and how everything just flows and it's spontaneous, and we just like grab insights and ideas, and whoever acts on something is actually making decisions already based on what we have deliberated. Like, it's a very, it feels like drawing on data. It feels like the same kind of process. And if you think about it, then all our interactions start to feel that way. So when I started learning about Holochain, what came to my mind, I'm not technical, so I think the good thing about us being a bunch of artists is that we can sort of synthesize things into images or metaphors. And so, but for me, it was very clear that what Jacob and what Art were describing about how whole the infrastructure of Holochain worked was something that we could just like almost grab our governance system and put it inside in that infrastructure. Because when you think about it, we're all making decisions and acting, and if we can record that in our individual chains and have a good way of making connections between the things that we care about, whether are insights or drawings or whatever it is, um, then it's sort of like you can start thinking about a new system that is really open for this kind of emergence. That is in general, my feeling. And we're getting closer and closer to understanding how mapping all the different things that the entire community is doing and how we do them. And I think it's a good time to talk to you because it's sort of like we're getting closer to needing specific tools. And what you described with saying not just what you're doing, but what you're envisioning, I think is the kind of tool that we need. So. Those probably what
I think that's really lovely. Thank you.
I was just going to add to that even more, you know, everything that I've read, every time I've come in contact with anything to do with Scepter and Holochain, has just felt like you guys were reading our minds, right? And the structure of things and the way that it allows for that individual freedom is really important for DADA, because it allows the diversity of things to emerge. And the thing that we find, the finality of blockchain tends to make things quite binary, that they are either, you know, successful or they're not. And what we've found through our deliberation processes is that we may not know whether something is going to be useful for 6 months or a year. And then we'll come back to it and suddenly say, ah, that thing, do you remember? And pick up that thread and weave it into where we are now. So people may have ideas or produce pieces of work that we're just not ready for yet. But we want to account for that value and we want to preserve those. And just the way Holochain is structured, those things don't get discarded. They're there for us to go back to and weave into the present conversation in such a beautiful way. So yeah, like reading our minds and building the system that we didn't actually know we needed until we've got to this point to say, wouldn't it be nice if, and then we look and there it is.
Yeah.
Well, that's freaking awesome. That warms my heart. No, it really does in a way, because the thing that I've been very present to is not knowing how it's going to work, right? So it's like when you create grammar, what you create is the possibility of expression. You have no idea what's going to be expressed. And so for me, what I've been seeing in your all's work is a space where we actually start to get to see expression. And and of course, if what your grammar is a grammar for creating grammars, then we get to see the kinds of grammars that get created in the context of value creation of the artistic world. And that's really awesome. So I'm very excited tell me what I can do to be of service. Where do y'all want to go?
So I mean, I think what we're doing is trying to get closer into just launching an app, right? On Holochain. The first, the at least some kind of conversation in there, understand how what we understand as an NFT could work on Holochain. And we actually think that it will be an evolution of what NFTs are, that it would be much better and that we could do something that we would learn a lot from NFTs, so that we can do something that with the best and take all the bad, and some of the bad. That's the first thing, but I'm particularly very, really interested in understanding our own governance model. And when you think about making an actual model, one of the things that we're confronting is that they're not tools. That all the tools are made for either hierarchy or voting mechanisms and things like that. And so, as we think about this model, then one thing that would be great is to also understand what are the tools ready in Holochain so that we can start that process of even if it's just ideation of this model. And yeah, so I think that's the first start, but we feel pretty confident that we're going all in as you are developing. We have no rush. Actually, we want to do things right. I think it's also interesting. I was talking to someone who told me that she knew about Holochain a few years ago, and when I mentioned that we were very excited about Holochain, she was like, "Oh, but those guys, like they should be big now, and that they don't deliver." And she knows data very well, right? And so I said, well, people will say the same things about us. We're actually, we're the first in the space, and 2017, and we have made no money. And all these marketplaces came out after us, and everybody's making millions, and all this hype, and we're like quietly doing the hard work. And it feels because of the way I see the people expressing how you think, that it's very similar. Like, the hard things take time. So in that sense, we're also, there's no rush. We just want to experiment and really get closer to what we want. So.
Yeah, well, that's lovely, because the thing too is that coming from that position allows a different kind of creation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I appreciate that I see it as there's a space to breathe into what to do. So there's a couple things that come to mind as I'm listening to you, and I'll throw them out and you tell me if it feels like a good place to go. The first one is, as you're talking about governance, I've never really, the only way I'm interested in that word governance is in the cybernetic sense of a governor as basically a systemic item that encodes the variety that's
Mm-hmm.
needed to understand the system that it's trying to govern. So this is Ashby's law of requisite variety in control theory. And so that's like a kind of hard law of systems theory that I'm interested in, because what it means is that you either have to have 50% of the population policing the other 50%, because that's how you get requisite variety, or you have to reduce the variety somewhere in the system. And so the thing that does that in healthy systems, in living systems, is grammars, as far as I can tell.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you create a grammar, because what that does is it eliminates so much variety and people know what to expect. The only reason we're having this conversation is because of a stacking of grammars in language, right? And so that there's that in the crappy sound that's going over, like I can't hear you very well, but there's enough variety and enough redundancy in the signal that I can, and I know what you're going to say to a certain degree so that I can actually get the full meaning of what you're saying. And there's a reduction of variety that makes that conversation possible. And so for me, this thing about creating grammars is the key issue in governance. What is our capacity to create the little rule sets that we play by, at least for this next level stuff, right? You know, the old way to do that was you create your organization's charter and your bylaws. But now, if you pump that up a different level, what are the little micro agreements that we're creating? And so when you talk about discourse, that's what I hear there. So that's number one. The other thing is social coherence. Like, I'm so much more interested in what yields social coherence than in decision making.
Yeah.
And I think one of the examples there is, like, if you imagine, I think Art uses this example sometimes when we've talked about this. When you imagine yourself getting up out of bed and going to the bathroom and to brush your teeth. So did you make a decision? What was the embodied, and like all of these things that you're doing as you're walking, you could think of it as like this incredible amount of decision making to get where you're going. But that's actually not what happened. What happened was you have all this embodied pattern that's just running, and you have this incredible fluid body coherence. And of course, there's training of that, and training that happens before. And so, like, when I heard you talking about chat because of discourse to come up with things rather than decision making, that's much more like entrainment, laying down the patterns that work for that kind of coordination, rather than, like, if you had to be conscious about, okay, now I'm lifting up my leg and I'm setting it down. Now I'm taking up my other leg and I'm moving it down. That would be decision making. And that's what happens when you have like complete, you know, your spinal cord is severed and you have to relearn how to walk. And it's horrible. That's not the way we want our social bodies to work. We want to do something different.
That's such a good analogy, yeah.
And so for me, this big question is, what is embodiment in the social body rather than conscious decision-making? Like, how can we effectively and without becoming enslaved to what becomes embodied, like being able to play with what became embodied? Because the thing is, like, embodiment is habit forming. That is, you jump into that mode and you can do so much so quickly. That's like what our bodies are full of. But how do we do that socially in a way that it's not also us being then locked into bureaucracy? Like, we're really terrified of that because our experience of embodiment is bureaucracy. But embodiment could be as beautiful as dance. If it's not beautiful, it's bureaucracy in the social space. So that's, I think, part of what we have to do, that thing that you just talked about, which is live into the reality of embodiment that has this really enlivening feel rather than something that isn't what we want.
So I think one of the ways that we have found to not get into that type of embodiment that could be detrimental, that is that we try to ensure that everything we do is not coercive in any way, shape, or form, right? It all has to be an active choice by the individual to choose to do something. So all of the incentives cannot be extrinsic. There are no extrinsic incentives for anything within the DADA invisible economy. And I think that is part of what helps us have these social norms or this kind of embodiment where we can deliberate. And as Bea has said, it's almost like we haven't made any decisions, that the decisions just happen.
Yeah, and I will add to that a new thing that I've been thinking about since I've been reading your work, Eric, because you came to this like new conclusion that Holochain is collaboration centric, not agent centric, right? I'm thinking that it all, like the way we coordinate on data, the way the real coordination is this type of collaboration that happens. And so that everything that I feel that the system in itself is probably as simple as our conversations on data, as that structure, because that's how we do everything. That's how we connect with each other. That's how we build on top of each other's insights, and that's how we build on top of each other's actions. I do this, and then I send it on the chat, and somebody takes it from there, or we deliberate with it. So it seems like maybe it's this embodiment is just the right environment for people to just collaborate in these different ways, and that includes, for me, all kinds of decision making. So it's true that it's almost that there is no need for governance at all.
I want to say that I think it's not like a trivial that the kind of defining characteristic of Dada when first came to be was a place for artists to engage in dialogue and collaboration and interaction in a visual way, not by talking but by drawing. But it's kind of like a little cornerstone that was put there that set the stage for this collaboration kind of action and mindset to flourish, and from there it kind of set up the environment for everything that happened in Dada, and all other little stones were put there to create this environment, and what also we call the Dada effect. As people spend time and interactions in this environment, they kind of train themselves, like maybe like in a way that you mentioned that you naturally learn how to walk for the first time. It's not something you think about, but you get trained to that. And I also get this feeling when we do our sessions, and it took a while. We decided to call them sense making, because we're trying to figure out what is it that we were doing. And this thing about how it's not like we are voting or arriving at decisions. They just kind of emerge or coalesce from just this, what we are doing there. We're trying to figure out the words, for what we're doing, but it feels like something more connected to really how your body learns, and not a very rational top-down approach of put your foot here and your arm there, like you were saying. But I think collaboration is at the very base of it.
But also conversation, you're right. It's like a mix of the two, right? It's a little bit different to have a conversation, a dialogue, than to collaborate. And there's an intention there to listen to the other that I think is important.
So when I hear you talk about collaboration, and some of the times when I've talked about collaboration, there's the notion of an outcome, right? So there's a question about, are we headed towards a specific outcome?
Right.
And that may be important. That is one kind of collaboration that we want. But then the other thing that I heard you say, Lenara, was you focused on conversation. And so what's fascinating to me about conversation is conversation only can exist in the context of language, of speaking. And when I say that in a slightly abstract sense, because your own drawings, your images, are conversation inside a grammar. You all created a grammar, a template for what constitutes a conversation, and what can happens inside the context of that conversation. Inside the context of that grammar. And I think that's absolutely central. And I love the fact that you started with art and visual representation, because it short circuits a lot of our expectations about what we expect to be the outcomes of spoken conversations. So I think that's really useful. And I really feel like I would love to learn more from you, what you're learning about that and what comes from that, because my sense is that, well, yeah, I mean, the other thing that you just talked about is you're seeing this emergence happening, and from the emergence is where you get the sense of what was decided. So I have spent quite a bit of time inside the Quaker tradition, and Quakers do decision making by something called sense of the meeting. A lot of consensus practices in the world were pulled from the Quaker tradition of sense of the meeting, where they end up calling it consensus, but sense of the meeting is not consensus. Sense of the meeting is waiting for the arrival of this emergent whole. It's not about everybody agreeing.
Oh, that's what it is then.
Right? It's a very different thing. And so the
Yeah.
base level secular determination is, wow, look at all these people. They don't vote. They don't do this stuff. So, okay, we'll do the same thing. But what that turns into is the least common denominator, everything we can all agree on. And it's basically voting where you set the threshold of win to 100%. Very, very different than a process of sense of the meeting where you understand that you're looking for this emergent whole. What you actually opine, your opinions, may not be what happens, and you're willing to go with that because what you're interested in is social coherence. And so this reflects back to the other thing you said, Sparrow, about agency and no coercion. Like when you said that, my heart jumped, because another inquiry that I've been holding recently is what is violence? And if we're trying to do something bigger in the world, we actually have to solve the issues of violence and deal with what violence is in the world and be able to address that. Not like I've actually sort of put that aside as a pacifist, like pretended like it doesn't exist. But as far as I can tell, the coercion is the core of violence.
Yes.
And so that when you put that at the core, and so the jumping from agent-centric to collaboration-centric, when you start from empowered agency, and you cannot have empowered agency in a context of coercion. Mm-hmm. And so that's the degree in which there's agent centricity. It's empowered agency. So it lands really strongly for me. And then in the context of empowered agency, then there's the safety, the support, the true depth of what's possible of non-coercive social coherence. Mm-hmm. But I got to say, achieving social coherence is incredibly hard, incredibly difficult. And so the other thing you all were talking about was like this, something that we experimented with early on in our work was what we called a doocracy. If you want to start doing, do it. And that's how we go. You go with what people do. It's hard to get coherence out of that. You end up getting these things that go off to wherever. So there's some other part that's hard, which I don't fully understand, about generating coherence in the context of empowered agency, because it's hard. And I think part of what's hard about it is that we don't have a grammar in which to express grammars. So we don't know actually what it is, the language we're speaking in, because we don't have an easy way. We only evolve our grammars, like you all are talking about. You start doing this thing with art and you don't know yet what the grammar is. But this is the core of what Holochain and Scepter is for, is to get to the place of having a grammar for creating grammars, so that raises and bumps our consciousness of this kind of capacity up to a whole nother level. Mm-hmm.
No, you just define there a bunch of things that we live, because like for us the thing is that it feels, when things feel right and we feel it, right? So the first of all, the consensus thing, we will tell Metagov, we work with them to define the model, and they're like, well, but you're making decisions by consensus, because it's like everybody's agreeing, right? But you just define it really well, because it's not, it was like, but it's not consensus. It's like a kind of consensus. Like what you define, that's exactly how it feels. It's like you just deliberate, have those conversations, and all of a sudden something comes up that it makes sense for everyone, right? And that's it, but you're not forcing that.
So Quakers call that, they have this notion, this experience, an experiential thing where it's called a gathered meeting. When you're in that process and you're searching for the sense of the meeting, and then that lands, there's this feeling of a gathered meeting. You didn't vote and see that everybody turned out yes. That's a different whole energetics that's involved in that. So yeah, I appreciate
Totally,
your
yeah.
describing that.
And also, like, it's interesting when there's like the very, I mean, we don't really have conflict. The very few moments in which somebody like sort of like gets what we call a trigger or emotional, we realized that it was good, like it was respectful to let that person just like let's go deeper because obviously there's something here that we need to talk about. Like it's not like trying to convince that person or trying to or being defensive. It's more like wow, like if you feel that strongly, let's just dig that like deeper. And in general, what happens is that we dig deeper, and then some really big insight comes out of that. And so you start to learn to trust the process. To just like flow with it. And it's such an important thing because I think what we're getting is into more intuitive kind of understanding.
Mm.
And it's ineffable. I mean, that's no words for that.
So I think humans are actually really good at that, like really, really good at that in small groups. So when we're in a group, even of this size, of all the people who I don't see your faces on the screen, I would love to, but that's okay. This size, we actually are really, really darn good at that process. I feel very curious about how we do that at thousands and 10,000s. What is
Yeah, they're appearing one by one.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, so I feel really curious. What's the other thing that is a guiding notion for me in all of the work that we do is this thing. I don't know who coined it, but I picked it up along the way sometime, of adjacent possible. What is the adjacent possible?
Mm.
And so I feel really curious as to what is the adjacent possible for DADA and on Holochain. What is, I mean, sort of like the typical thing people talk about is MVP, but that's not, the point is like, what is the next opening? What is the adjacent possible? Not the thing that's 2 steps down the way. And my sense is you guys do this automatically, from what I can tell. You're always looking just to take the next step into the adjacent possible. Very often in tech worlds, people want to take the adjacent impossible because it's 6 steps down. So what's alive for you all there?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually just going to talk about that whole area, right? Because it is really important to the way we work. It's I describe it as pronoia, which is the universe conspiring to help you. So
I just my sweetie just gave me that book.
Excellent. You know, it is, we're searching for something and then a solution appears. And that happened with Holochain, right? It's happened with us all along the way. And so I think it goes back to that having many started experiments, and then when and they're ready. And when the opportunity arises, you take that next step because you've done that preparation beforehand, and it's there waiting. I know that we were really interested in trying to pull together some of the disparate places that we come together. So we have a Telegram chat, and we do these Zoom calls, and we have a Miro board, and all sorts of different kinds of communication channels that are not on the DADA platform. So another area that we're exploring is trying to consolidate some of those so that more things can be done in a more holistic way. And that's a completely parallel thread to the exploring NFTs that Jakob is looking at.
Have any of you guys, have you guys talked to Guillaume yet and the compository? And okay, Cool. Yeah. Okay. Well, there's a lot of things to say. Okay, go ahead. Show me.
Okay, so do you see my screen?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so now this is quick, just a quick. I don't want to take too much of the time on this, but this is sort of what we are doing. This is DADA, which is basically isolated from everything else. If you are on DADA, and you might not know anything that is going on, most people don't know, but the coordination happens on Telegram and different groups. We have Google Calendar to be able to have these sessions and the special sessions. We have 2 Discords for different groups. We have all the meets, and then things, YouTube with all the videos, which is like hours and hours of video. We do drink and draws. We do VR hangouts. We have all this Figma Miro for like system model, all the tech stuff, the market, like all the stuff that we need to actual development. And we do live drawing performances for events and things and art, and also curation, and everything is collective, right? Like collective curation and putting shows on VR, and also now we have a fund, and we are also managing money collectively. So we are, we bought the land and crypto voxels, and now everybody's like doing cool stuff inside there. Like we're collecting actually like works of art from other artists. And we're also doing a program, which is why we talked to Paul last week, a program about regenerative sort of programs in using the farms of some of our artists and planting trees and things like that. So all of these things happen spontaneously. There are a bunch of people involved, and everybody does whatever they do on their own. And so it's quite amazing that we get so much done and all these ideas just flourish because somebody can do them, right? But it's all disseminated. And I think there's this idea that, I don't know, when I talk to like Metagov, or the idea that having all these tools and just plugging into them is enough, I think is the opposite. I think we need to get to something that is actually much more than just one thing, like maybe it's modular, maybe it's some, everyone has it customized. Like if I, this will be Ilan's view when he's on the sessions, he's also joined, and he's also on the chat, and then you have a schedule, but somebody else might be too distracted, so you don't have the chat, but you have something else, right? Or you are browsing, and then you have, you're listening to the sessions. And, but that it is a need for all of this to be integrated. And I know you saw the video where we're talking about, a more rhizomatic type of communication path. And I'm thinking that it's, if our process is sort of like a stream of consciousness, it really is about allowing for that to just happen at any time, at any point. And then it will be about how we actually capture what all the highlights of, of everything that we are doing, right? Like how we capture what is needed so that whoever can do it, and is able to do it, just goes and picks it up. And so I think we're getting more into maybe something that embodies everything together into one platform. And it doesn't have to be impossible or too like crazy. But I think part of it is like, as I did this map, I'm mapping out everything that we're doing. Lisa just went and did a visualization of it, right? Like it's just like, okay, so we can do something like sort of a map in which whatever is, things light up. If there is something happening on a part of data, then it's light up, and then you go there if you want to. If you don't want to, just stay where you are and do your thing and go on. So it starts to be something that is more unified, and that it can be maybe just simple, but what we need is to make sure that everything is in that everyone could have the information. And then again, it's not about us distributing information, it's about the information being available at the right time when people would like to act on them. And so just quickly so that you don't go too specific, but we're going pretty detailed on this and trying to figure out what type of tools we need.
That's really beautiful and really impressive. I have some thoughts that I can share about some of the words you used that might be helpful, or maybe not, and maybe that will lead to some adjacent possible. What I heard you say was you want something to unify, right? You want there to be one place. So in my experience, there's two kinds of unity. There's the kind of unity of location and the unity of pattern. And so the thing that I think happens right now is the unity of location. Put everything in the same place. It's the thinking of the castle walls. You put the town inside the walls, and you create the social coherence by putting things inside one place. The huge jump that happened in the world was, no, we're going to jump away from security by walls to security by laws. And so then the laws became a pattern by which to live and create safety instead of a place in which to live and create safety. And so it's again back to the social coherence. What gives you social coherence? And it has a lot to do with violence and coercion, right? It's related there. And so when I hear you talk about that, what I'm most curious about is, as you drew your map, what is the grammar? What are the parts of speech that live on that map? Because if you can tell me what that grammar is, if you can say this is the grammatics, then representing that grammar in a Holochain application that people can run, and then perhaps attaching to that particular Holochain application other Holochain applications or non-Holochain applications that attach to that grammar becomes kind of trivial. It becomes super easy because so like the other thing is like this conversation, everything is happening in one place. The place is the grammar of English or the grammar of human languages. It is allowing us to represent all these things that matter in this conversation. And so I'm wondering if that's true. It may not be, because it may be that you actually do need one place, like literally the thing about being able to click on one website, maybe. But clicking on one website is like maybe not so much one place anymore, right? You go to your own, or also if you go to your own Holochain node, you choose what user interfaces you put on top of the DNAs. In the final build out. There's going to be a lot of other user interfaces that allow us to assemble the user interfaces on top of the DNAs that are written. That's the compository that Guillaume is working on, and various other ideas that we've had from the beginning in Scepterland about how you do this kind of thing. Because then you get to do the empowered agent version of the window into that reality. It's because you've got both a grammar of the content and a grammar of the viewing. So this is where it's very exciting to me that you have that rich a data set for you to figure out what the grammar of unity is in it. Does that make sense? Is that helpful?
Well, I think Sparrow will probably have a great idea, but I wonder if, and Shabnam is not here today, I think, but could it be related to a ground truth, Sparrow, and to the map that we did for the environment? Because I think you're right about the pattern. So the one thing that what we see as a formula is that it's not an agent-based model. What we have created is a needs-based model. That's how Sparrow called it, because it's about the needs. So the needs, we assume that our needs are all universal, and what we did was to separate all the, like really went deep into separated all the extrinsic incentives versus intrinsic incentives that create and really visualize the path that for the same need, say my need of safety or my need of belonging, that same path when it's based on extrinsic rewards and the outcomes that you get, and when it's intrinsic. And it is possible to make an environment in which you are following those intrinsic rewards as opposed to being incentivized by the extrinsic. So when you do that, the formula basically is, actually, let me show it to you. I have a couple of things that I don't know if this is what you're talking about, but it might give you an idea. Let's see. Can you see my, let me know when you see my screen.
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, okay. So we did this sort of study of how, this is really any market, but this is for the crypto market, right? Like you see that it's not just that it's based on competition, scarcity, and speculation, and you have, artists competing with each other, and collectors competing with each other, and then, all the dynamics that we know happen. But it's also good to recognize that the incentives are extrinsic and qualitative, and the outcomes tends to be few winners, extreme inequality, value extraction, and things like that. But also to recognize what is out of boundary, right? Everything that is qualitative, that is intangible, and that is intrinsic gets out of boundary because, in the case of art, the market cannot put value to beauty or to the amazing feeling that you feel, or the therapeutic feelings of making art, right? So what we know, we think that we have, is an environment in which the action in itself is priceless because you are following your intrinsic reward. So the action in itself is the reward, and at the same time is a contribution to the community. So it's a gift for you, and it's a gift for the community, and that's where we don't measure this. We just follow, sort of map the actions and visualize, or try to visualize, that intrinsic, intangible value. And so the environment that is on data and that is also replicated on these sessions is an environment of collaboration, abundance, and creativity, right? Like, there's not one thing that we realize is that we called it working groups in the beginning, and you naturally fall into this, like, no agenda, no hour limits, no restrictions over time, right? So it became this sense of in sessions, no experts, no needing to solve problems or anything like that. And then the incentives are intrinsic and qualitative. The outcome tends to be fulfillment, and ideally, once we have the economy up and running, we already feel a little bit of this, but it should feel like more like we have a safety net, right? Which is not the same as having money. A safety net that allows you to be free and independent, really free and feel safe, which is how we feel now with this community. And so we also realize that then we don't need constitutions, vetting, sanctions, voting, none of those like very restrictive kind of mechanisms. And what gets out of boundary naturally are speculation, competition, scarcity, extrinsic rewards, and things like that. So if there is such a thing as a grammar, I would say that it might be something to do with this ground truth that we have.
So how would you take so that's really fascinating. And I find it challenging and really interesting as a result. What you put there, how would you match that onto the other diagram you showed me? Like, because the thing that you were saying, if you're saying I want to create a unity out of all of this stuff, how would you do that with the stuff that you're populating in your other map?
If I may, to me, I think it's so interesting that you talk about grammar, and I don't know if I understand the definition of grammar as you use it, and also conversation, because everything comes in data from conversation. And so conversation means in data that everybody who is talking to each other are at the same level. It's not like top down. It's not a lecture. It's not that, it's really like a kind of a one-to-one that then becomes like a more extended conversation among many. And in a way, our sense-making sessions are the same. It's also not top down, and it's also, a way where we deliberate. And so I'm wondering if, and when we say that we want all of this to happen in one place, we're basically saying we want all of these different styles and kinds of conversations to happen in one place, because they're all basically kind of dialogues. But what I wonder is, well, let me just organize my thought.
Yeah. I wanted to add, because what Judy just said goes back to, I think, what you were saying, Eric, in the beginning, that having this sort of social cohesion is really hard. And what we've found is, because we live by the principle of no coercion, people are present in the places that they want to be present in. But what we've found in practice, and that's fine, that's good, because people participate as much or as little and wherever they're most comfortable. But what we've found is that there are some people who participate everywhere or almost everywhere. And so the conversations bleed from one place to another. And what we found as a result of that is that some people would have liked to have been involved in certain things, but they weren't aware because they weren't in the place where it was being discussed. And that's what led us to the idea that having things in a central place, or having a known place where people can find things out, would be helpful.
But also they could have been, the other problem is that we wanted to create a chat that is more organic to the way people actually speak in real life, because you could be in the same place where this conversation is happening, but somebody said this thing, like, I don't know where in the thread, and then you missed it. You're also need kind of to be at the same time, not only at the same place. So we were also, it's not only being in the same place, but also being able to have these conversations where all around the world, different time zones, different languages, and trying to integrate as much as possible a way of having the conversation that will be more clear and effective in a way.
Sorry,
but to answer that question of how, I mean, that has to do also with intrinsics, as Paro was saying, because no one is where they don't want to be. The problem is that maybe they are not where they would want to be. No one is coerced to be anywhere, but sometimes people just miss that they want to be somewhere.
Maybe we can see it instead of location, because I don't see it as bring it all into data because of location, although it is, but more in terms of coordination. It's like the coordination is too scattered, and so it's not a good coordination method, I think. And so maybe the coordination is a pattern, right? Maybe the coordination is the grammar that you're talking about. But what I feel is that right now the coordination is just not efficient, even though we have that coherence as a community. We need to scale more and more, right, to involve more people, and I don't think we can at this moment.
Mark?
Yeah, go for it. You can.
It was just a quick observation listening to some of the things. I mean, I'm a new person here, and just going to into the space and the ground. But it's to do with your adjacent possible, because how it relates to risk. It's about they call it shadow futures, I guess. So what's possible here and now is difficult because we're used to certain things, but what's possible there is something maybe you could think about over there, maybe bring parts of it back in. And part of that, with this idea of having everything in one place, it creates the problem of buckets. You know, you have huge amounts of things in one space, and that coherence and the language can get lost in that. The thing I was thinking about is more about threads. Is how do you develop, even if it's multiple things, is developing the connections and the coherence with it's a map you want to draw of a conversation rather than than just attach everything in one place, because then it just becomes so much. And what is it? Why is it? But having some new kind of way of looking how different things relate to one another, how a thread involves, following the breadcrumb, literally. That might be a different way of looking at it, I think. But it was just a quick thought. So.
Yeah, I was going to ask, you made this diagram that for the chat, remember, where you said we chat and then we realize at some point, like, oh, this was something important, and we go back and put like some hashtags for now. But this was an insight, or this insight is connected to this one. And then this was a decision. Sometimes you only realize later also this was a decision. But being able to go back and put the points in the map, like after you pass through it, is in hindsight is when you saw where were these important points, and connect, like create like a topography that connects those points. And that can serve also as a guide of how this big web of conversation is evolving. And I think you have a slide for that too, Bea. Maybe if you want to show it, I don't know if it makes sense.
I can look at it maybe continue to.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Yeah, that I'm gonna look for it. But if you wanna jump in.
Someone needs to buy new headphones and send to Bea. I think I'm going to do that.
Sorry.
So the thing that I'm thinking about is that it sounds like maybe one adjacent possible for you for a Holochain app is to actually build a mapping app, a resource mapping app. And the kind of grammar that I'm talking about is something like, it's a little bit like what you were talking about, Mark. It's like bringing these things together. So the grammatical units that you're interested inside this mapping app are, there's the resource, the thing that you're mapping. There's the conversation or conversations that you're having about that resource. There are the relations to other things, how that resource relates to other resources. And you can have lots of those. Right? And then that's actually pretty simple, right? Maybe that's all there is. Maybe you can do a few more. Maybe this is as simple as possible, but no simpler. So like a grammar that would be something like this. And that's really easy to represent in Holochain. And people can, well, it's actually a little bit more complicated because you need a user interface to talk about adding a conversation, right? Because a conversation about a resource, you're adding things to the DHT, but I'm sure, Jakob, you're like, yeah, this is trivial. I should hope, right? Because this is pretty easy to add elemental chat where every conversation relates to a resource. In like right now, if you go to elemental chat, the conversations are inside a channel, but a channel is the same thing, could be the same thing as a resource. And then you could do all kinds of things to just display that. But the thing that I was asking is, what is sufficient to gain the clarity of your map? And one of the things I'm hearing is that it is insufficient to have a resource in a map without a conversation around it. In fact, maybe without having many conversations around it. And so then you might have to actually have a little bit of grammar about your conversation, that this conversation is an exploratory conversation. This is a closing conversation. This is a lecture by the author, which would be a completely unequal conversation where you're not on the same footing. Maybe you want to allow that into your grammar of conversations. And so that may be a sub-grammar nested inside the grammar of your map that you're talking about here. And I don't know, I mean, clearly you evolved this and you start with that. But when I think about a grammar, to answer the question before, Judy, a grammar to me is it's the best word that I have for this sort of abstract way about thinking about the template or the dimensions of variability of the space that you're trying to create or hold. So grammars in language are about parts of speech and subject, predicate, object, and all that. Grammars in art are very different. They have to do with things like foreground, background. They may also have to do with the materials you use. Grammars in sports are about the range of variability of what's allowed inside that physical motion. These are all what I would call a grammar. And so that's what I was thinking, like, oh, what is the grammar of this mapping tool that you want? And you could do it in Holochain, you could do it in whatever, it doesn't matter, I don't care. But doing it in Holochain would give you a place to play with it. And it shouldn't be very complicated. It should be pretty simple. Jakub, did you do the clarification symbol? Like, was that the C of a clarifying comment?
I'm sorry, Eric, could you please repeat the question?
Oh, I saw you going like this, but you had your hand on your head. So when
sorry.
when we just have this grammar in a lot of our Zoom calls that if you go like this, it's clarifying question, right? So I thought that's what you were doing. Sorry.
Jakub needs constant clarification.
So I don't know if this is what you were talking about, Leonardo, but everything that you're saying, Eric, it makes sense. And also what Mark said, I don't know what the grammar is, but this is what sort of, in terms of decisions, what we figured out is that it's a deliberation process. With the deliberation, if it's solid, makes completely irrelevant any type of decision-making mechanism. So if it's about the deliberation process, then there is about like mapping that so that it's not, that it's like you can actually follow the narrative easily. And so because as Leonardo said, decisions are things, not just decisions, actions, everything with ideas. Everything just happens completely spontaneous throughout these like conversations that we have. Then to be able to map when something special has happened, like somebody had this idea of doing this thing, well, that becomes I call it decision here, but it can be anything. It can be an insight. It can be anything. But if it's a decision, then to be able to map that deliberation process all the way, everybody that was involved, all the way to the result, in a rhizomatic way or in a branch type of way in which then you can make connections. Because what happens, I think, in these sessions is that we have the conversations and we have these branches of conversations, but there is this like narrative of insight. We go from insight to insight to insight. That's how we progress. We don't progress with like minimum viable product and deadlines and things like that. It's more like from one insight building up another insight, and that's how we feel that we're actually making progress. And so it seems to me that there's so much, that there's a few variables that are important. One is spontaneity. The flow shouldn't be interrupted. And so maybe when you mention my allocation with to compartmentalize, I will think in terms of like Telegram and then all these different channels to make all these different things. It's very like a lot of friction there. It stops that flow. So we need a flow for that thing to just like move. And then we also need a way of catching those highlights, those insights, and being able to register those in a way that we can archive them, in a way that then it's easy to come back to them. It's a second thing. And I would say that the third thing will be how we make those connections. A way of making those, easily make those connections, because we're talking here and then another remembers, oh, this other thing. So we have it on our minds, and we have many minds. So we need ways of just making that, dump that into some kind of interface. I think that those are the three things that we're feeling pain right now. Does it make sense at all?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know what the next step is in that, but it feels to me like you actually already have it. You've got a sense of what you want. I mean, the grammar is simple. You want those connections. You want to have that notion of an insight. That's actually a grammatical unit. So you record the insight and you connect the insight to the other. I use the word resource. It's a bad word. The resource sounds more like it's like either an object of inquiry, or it is that thing that you call the decision sounds like it's a transition. Mm-hmm. So you could record a transition because you've realized that you've shifted from one place to another. And so to me, like actually nailing down what those things are and how you would use them in a user interface, Holochain is a great and one of many places in which you can represent that kind of grammatics, and then you have your user interface that you put that on top of, and you can use multiple ones. To me, it sounds like a really beautiful experiment, and I think the terms that you're using are really useful. Like actually sticking with those terms, I like that.
I like your terms better because we have so many problems with defining things. Everything seems just wrong for the right. Everything's transactional or one of my
favorite things is what we call a friend of mine invented that I like to use all the time is it's the Department of Names department. So when the Department of Names department is in session, I love to play.
Yeah, it's like you like we often talk like we just want to rename everything, but then you become sort of like a cult. You don't want to feel like, but transition makes total sense instead of decision. That makes complete sense.
Yeah, I like that a lot too. I was going to ask, when you mentioned resource, what was like examples of resources, so to have an idea of what was behind the concept?
When I was looking at the map, I mean, there were the nodes. You had these things, like everything that was on your map, the one that you shared, each one of those was a thing that you were connecting to other things. And so I was calling that a resource, like a web resource. But I would actually rather understand what those things are. Were they conversations? Were they artworks? Were they spaces? Right. So I just used a generic word because maybe that's what it is. It maybe should be like the other way I think about what you want here is you want a useful graph. Mm-hmm. And so the resource would be a node in the graph. Right. And it's possible that's all it is. And then you have types of the nodes in the graph. And so one type of node in a graph is a conversation. And then it relates to another node in the graph, which is, I don't know, like, is this particular video that's being recorded that we're in, this becomes a resource, but it was also a video conversation following the video grammar, which is different than your written grammars that you do, or different than there's different types. And so you can think about typologies, and you can also create folksonomies that you allow for tagging, because that's really useful. But sometimes it's useful to have much harder notions, because indeed subject predicate is a really fundamental thing. which is different. It's like it's fundamentally important to understand the notion of a subject and a predicate if you want to use language. So similarly, a conversation is fundamentally different than a description of that conversation. Maybe, but maybe not. You know, so that's part of the exploration of the grammatics of this kind of web that you're trying to draw. And what makes it coherent is the fact that we actually come to an understanding of the parts of speech, or the elemental units of the map. So in a regular map, you have typographical lines. They look like one thing. You know, you end up having the key. You have colors. You have cities that are done. Those are all the grammatical elements in the map. What are the grammatical elements of this map that gives coherence to navigating it? So like the flow, I saw that one of the things that you were talking about is what's the flow? So a flow might be a record of how this thing transpired over time. That might be a grammatical element in your map. Or a history.
Fascinating, yeah.
That's the kind of thing that I think about, right? And about in what's necessary to make these things happen. And that's what what Holochain was designed to do, is make it easy to come up with these grammars and do it in a way where you can end up having lots of user interfaces on top of the grammars, because literally every program is its own API. That's another way of thinking about the technology that makes that useful.
Yeah, that goes back to the slide you showed before, Bea, of this, you know, ideal display where it's highly customizable. If you want to just draw, or if you want to see like video, or if you want to see a chat, or whatever makes sense to you. But everything, all the underlying flows of, you know, conversations and information are happening, and they're, you know, but then depending on your UI is what you're gonna display of that, and a way of you can, you know, kind of zoom in and out, or filter or sort and create your own map for what's going on.
Amazing. Well, you're making me, it's like exploding. Yeah, go ahead, Jacob. And I think Mark had to say something too.
Yeah, sorry. Mark, were you?
I was thinking about you grasping with the complexities of language and how you describe this. Perhaps one thing to do is not to think about it in terms of encompassing everything you want to do, but thinking more about it in building blocks. I've been reading and fascinated recently by the work of David Deutsch and Sciarra Maletto on constructor theory, which is actually looking at new ways of describing fundamental physics. And listening to this as a designer, it's like the applications to this are way wider than that. You know, the idea of describing how things, what they can do and what they can't do, and how they relate to one another. But it's thinking in a more basic grammar than something like, you don't need to describe the whole, but what are its component parts and how do they relate to each other? You know, so you don't have to have one big word to describe something or how this fits to something else. You know, think about Lego. You know, how does this work that way instead? You know, but, yeah, just a quick side observation. So.
Go, Jacob.
No, sorry. I think that if you have the response, I can then follow up with my question, which is a bit of the different bucket.
What I just want to comment on about the Lego piece, that's exactly right. The thing about is Legos have a grammar. They've got the outy side and the inny side, and the grammar is what allows for composability. Grammars are the key to they are a composable abstraction. And it's incredibly robust grammar, Legos. And they actually make my point even stronger. That's what I'm saying is we have to really get good at understanding what is the grammar of basic level composability. And so to me, there's a ton of experimentation that has to happen in the world of playing with grammars and using tools that help us to build grammars. And that's why I'm suggesting that maybe this map, find the simplest one you can do, try to do it and see what the grammar looks like. Did it turn out that conversations next to events was that base level subject predicate? Does it turn? I don't think we really know. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so darn excited about you guys, is because you're doing that playing inside this space. And this is what it needs. We need to actually play to develop this, especially if the grammar, the grammatic capacity that we're trying to build is one that builds grammatic capacities. It's a meta thing, and that's what Holochain is meant to be. So it gets weird, but it's really important. I mean, it's like, to me, it's like the key of it. So that's my comment. Yeah.
We do have some experience at that, though, because when we first started trying to understand what made the DADA community cohesive, what made DADA so special, what made DADA the place where we could imagine these other things. It took, what, months, I think, of actually picking things apart to get to that fundamental level of saying, this all really works because we constrain everything on the platform to basically one action. You draw.
You reply.
You reply. And so everything is the reply. And how you reply is your expressive element. And that's where your variation comes in. But before you have that variation, you have just that one action.
Yeah, it was quite interesting how we found that having constraints, and sometimes this was not on purpose. It was kind of like a bug, right? But it turned out the best feature. Or things were like, you have to put effort because they were not as, easy plug and play as, you would be told was the best. But that actually generated a great result, because then you really got people engaging because they really were motivated and wanted to, and not just, okay, I'll just do this because it's easy enough or something like that. You really start to think about why I want to do this. Do I really want to do this? And just the time spent doing things is kind of like guides you already in this embodied learning process, or whatever you want to call it, and it ended up working to a good effect. And we just recognized later that this is what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
My question was, I wanted to leave it a bit more to the end, because it's a bit more getting back to the technical level,
Yeah, go for
layer,
it.
right? And the question was to Eric, because Eric, I have just started reading a bit more about sin, and so I'm just at the beginnings, and I was wondering whether you'd recommend us to start exploring with sin right away, or whether you'd recommend perhaps staying with more the basic kind of holochain layer for, yeah.
I have a conflict of interest. I'm really excited about what's possible inside using Sin for being able to do real time stuff, and like right now, Sin is a little behind. Like, I haven't compiled it up to the latest version, and things are moving so fast, and I just have to spend all my time really working to get Holochain and Holo out the door, and all those pieces. So I haven't had a lot of time with it. So it's a little behind. I think it really depends on, to like let go of my conflict of interest. It really depends on what's the adjacent possible y'all want to play with. Like so, for example, if you really wanted to just do a pass the ball game, like, it depends on how how much interactivity, real-time interactivity you want to have. I think if you want real-time interactivity, well, actually, you know, the thing is signals work pretty darn well. And so the stuff that Connor has done with Acorn, it works pretty well. And so you can do a lot of real-time interaction as long as you're not trying to do shared state. It's pretty easy to do real-time interaction. But if you're trying to do shared state, like actually have a collaborative drawing, that's a little harder to do without something like Sin. I don't know. It's like, where is your heart taking you? Go play. It's like, I think I would leave that to where your energy goes. I mean, I can tell you that if you do it, if you want to work in Sin, you want to be a sinner. I'd be very happy to work with you and like keep things moving and get that going, because I think there's a lot of cool things to do there. And I'm even behind. There's a guy who like refactored the code for a whole nother state model engine in a pull request, and I haven't even finished reviewing it, and it looks really good. It's like it's a better compression of the stuff into its own library, so you don't have to use the state model stuff in Svelte. But yeah, I don't know. Follow your heart.
Yeah, it feels like that map. We didn't have an answer to your question. So to me, it's like, yeah, there's there's something that we need to figure out first, because that's going to be the essence, right, of everything that we're going to do with the collaboration. Seems to me. So I want to know what that grammar is now.
It sounds like we need a sense-making session on that.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't want to stop work on defining the NFTs, though, because
Right.
I think that is very beautiful. I think that we will come up with, and are already partway there, a better embodiment of what NFTs for art are on Holochain than is ever possible on blockchain.
Yeah.
Can we go there for a little bit? I would
Yeah.
really like to learn from you all about this. So can you just please tell me from your like deepest, I almost want to say heart space, what is it? What is the core of a non-fungible token?
It's a unique expression of a communication, a way of communicating.
Okay, hold on. Real slow here. It's a unique expression of a communication.
Yes.
So does that mean it's a symbol? It's a sign. It points to the communication.
No, it is the communication. So an artwork that I create is the communication. It's the thing that I'm expressing, that I'm communicating to the world. And I'm hoping that that communication resonates with others.
But then the NFT.
I also think that the minting, right, as we call it, the NFT, is a very important act because there is a process in creating an artwork, and that can be long or short, or it's very unique to whoever is doing it. But this moment where you mint it, right, I think is very significant. And that's when it goes into the chain. It gets registered in the chain. For me, it's almost a ritual, personally, how I see it.
So is that the equivalent? So it just occurred to me when you said that is the equivalent of when you're done, you sign your artwork.
Yes.
Yes.
That's it.
It is has a strong analogies to a signature, because also in this fact that you're signing with your keys into the chain, it's literally a signature, right? And so that's a part of it, but there's only one of the aspects. I think it's there, and so there's also a timestamp when that happens, when you mint, right? And then there is the kind of like, for example, when we're talking about digital files, right? And you create a digital artwork, each file, each copy, there's no original in copy because files are identical to every single bit. So, but when one thing that is kind of like open up like a new possibility when NFTs came to be, was to have something unique associated with this digital file, right? So the token is unique, and I decide there will be, let's say, one edition of this NFT, or I can decide there will be more editions, but it's like a specific number, and each one of them, right, will have the creator that minted, but also what we call the owner, right? And that might not be the best term. We're talking about other terms for the person who kind of like takes care of it or stewards it, or whatever, you know, other terms we can use, but someone that holds it, so to speak, this object. And it is different than any just simple copy of a digital file, because it has this unique signature on the chain with the time and et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's embodied in very, you know, extra things than just the process of creation, or, you know, putting into a file and all those things. There's several things in the NFT for me going on that have great value, I think, symbolic value, and, you know, all kinds of other values. They're not just the ability to exchange it for some cryptocurrency and that you can use, you know, you can call it money or something like that.
So,
Yeah,
It makes it concrete. It makes this digital art concrete in that sense that you, in a utilitarian way, it's like any, like you can buy it or sell it, and once you sell one, then it ceases to be yours, which is the difference between just having that same file in your computer forever, but it doesn't have that concrete either signature or that which makes it almost like digitally concrete. It's really a digital version of art in that way. In the way that you can.
So for me,
it's like an object.
Yeah, the token side of things represents the social exchange, the contract between two people. Something I created was passed to someone else to take care of or look after, and then it might be passed on after that, but those connections are visible and permanent. And that's what the token does for me.
But then
Just to clarify, was there also was part of the intention also to serve as a kind of a vehicle for interfacing with the, let's say, with the outside grammars or the economical system, like not in the traditional market way, but helping find ways how to actually, bring some economical aspects or stability or resources to the network. Was that also a part? Because this is what I'm not a bit.
Yeah, I think like in the smart contracts, you could, it has embedded a set of permissions that you can, that you can invent and you can license, or you can. So there is an interaction where you say, or how many of them, what can you do with them, what limitations are there? Can you burn it? Can you not burn it? So it also has like a whole set of meanings, and people can decide like, how they want to how they want them to behave, and on top of it they can be layered so that I mean, in the basic terms of art, like if you code a smart contract with royalties, then if that item is sold forever and ever and ever, the artist will get a royalty forever and ever and ever, because that is in the smart contract. But also creatively, if you can layer different files and package everything as an NFT, each one of the creators gets, that attribution and that signature, and also potentially that revenue, even though it's like one object. So if Bea makes a drawing and somebody animates it and somebody adds music to it, all those three people are going to be knowing at all times where that landed and what they're getting back in return.
Let me just jump in before Eric, just to where we could go into Holochain, how we see it, because to me, one of the problems I always felt with the NFTs was this representation through a token, right? We need the token to represent, to point to that artwork, and it's the token that is passed around. And so one thing that is very important to me, I think, is the attribution, the capturing, registering that attribution of the artist. But on Holochain, we're actually, with the invisible economy, we're not selling art. And so we still have the need to register who did what forever, right? That's very important. But it feels like it would be really nice if we could just post a drawing on DADA, as we do that now. And instead of going to Amazon and going into IPFS, that drawing goes straight into Holochain, into Holo, and then gets timestamped. You get the data integrity, right? Right off the go. You don't need a token, because we don't, we need to pass it, so that maybe I can pass it to Lenara or to Judy from my chain to theirs, so that they can store it. But we don't need to. We don't need that kind of transaction. So it seems like a more direct. It could be a more direct type. So it's at the end. It's about how we account for the values, right? The values of those the data. Right, of the art in that case.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for all those answers. That helps me land. And I see that Sparrow has to go. Okay. I guess others do too. So what's interesting to me about what happened here is that you all gave me, at least in my listening, a bunch of grammatical elements of what an NFT is. Like what I heard was custodianship. Like that is a notion that's important to you. And so I would say an NFT is a tool for helping understand custodianship, right? And so therefore, part of custodianship, it sounds like then there was another one, which was provenance. What is the history of record, which is what a provenance always is, even on a regular piece of art. You have the list on the back of the provenance of how it changed hands, and that's part of the attestation that it's real. So that's a grammatical element that's important. I heard some pieces around, and all of these things are about what people agree to do in the world, it seems like, in regard to a piece of art. So the other one is also like a royalty, or like an ability to keep track of, so what is the right name for the grammatical element? It's actually almost like revenue. Like you want to include a grammatics of revenue. That's one that I heard, right? And I also heard we don't want a grammatics of revenue, which is important to know if you do or you don't want it, because you'll do different things when you do and when you don't, and it's fine to want both. You know, I'm not making a judgment about that.
But we have what Judy described is what we have, right?
Yeah.
In Ethereum, what I described is
Yeah.
what we want to.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, but
and it's also like the way that it's been behaving, like people have been behaving lately. They're also a store of value. They're also an investment. So you can. I think the grammar of art applies to them. Like if you think it's I think pretty much the same grammars that you find in art curation, investment, collection, aesthetics, all of that applies.
Yeah, but for us though, for us it's different. Like for us, it's more important. Like it's not store value. For us, it's actually how you capture the intangible value. How we capture that emotion that I felt when I saw that, the connection that it made me with an artist or with it. Those things those are things that we're visualizing, and it would be really nice to capture them within this accounting of value.
Yeah, but the thing I wanted to get to is each one of those grammatical elements, they are all about agreements about what people will do, which exists outside of the digital space, right? Because people will do them or not do them. And so it's interesting if you also, if you're like, to me, that's just an interesting fact, right? So what you're doing is you're creating a representation, a digital representation about social agreements. And the thing that's funny to me is that is the definition of what a Holochain DNA is. But the thing that's interesting about that is that those agreements, they get run and checked on every single node. So it's just like that. That's how you get social coherence, that you've all agreed ahead of time, consensually, without coercion, to play this game by the rules. This particular game is about custodianship and knowing where things are, and we choose to look at that register to know that. You obviously could go and choose to look at a piece of paper. You could go choose to print it in the newspaper. You could choose however you want to come to the social agreement. It's just non-coercively we've chosen to look at this particular register to behave this way. Okay, so yeah. Yeah, so it's exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing how you encode those particular grammar bits in your Holochain-based definition of that. I mean, I would be happy to kibitz and look at the code that you're writing and make suggestions if you would like. That'd be lovely.
Oh, amazing. No, it's been,
Yeah,
I mean,
of course.
if we're quiet, it's because you're just like gave us homework, and it's really exciting. Yeah, because it gives us a north where to go from here. I hope you feel that way, Jacob.
Yes, sorry, I missed a bit of the question, please.
Oh no, that I hope you feel that way too, that you have a sense of where to go.
Oh yeah, I mean, for me, this feels very exciting for a bunch of reasons, and one of them is also that Eric at the beginning said, right, that art and games are those fields, and I'm now like really more and more excited about using actually the grammars of different games, or kind of deconstructing games using the lens of grammars or rights, or yes. So I think this will be pretty interesting exploration. Yeah, but it's also like a huge landscape, like trying to sense the different bunches of like emerging grammars. Some of them, yeah, related to yeah, all of this. So yeah, it will be a challenge, but I will be happy to be exploring with you and helping bring others on board from the Holochain community.
Amazing. Wow, well, I don't know if anyone has a final question for Eric, but it's been really, 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 really wonderful. Thank you. Anyone wants to give me questions? No?
Well, I get to ask one then.
Yeah, go for it.
Wait, I had one.
Oh, please,
Sorry.
please.
Sorry. So when we talk about grammar, and we're just about kind of creating new language.
I think you.
Yeah, we lost you.
I lost you for a second. Yeah, can you say it again, please?
When we talk about grammar, we're talking about recreating or changing our current language, the one we're speaking with now, and replacing it with a more regenerative type of language, not just through computer code, but also how that's going to perhaps change how we speak in general.
So
as we move forward.
So when I talk about grammar, I don't necessarily mean that. I mean, I'm sure that the grammar of the verbal languages that we speak will continue to evolve, but I'm pretty sure also that they're pretty complete for their purpose, which is to talk about causal reality. They're really good about talking about causality. Subjects and predicates are about basically causes and effects, and we just need that grammar. When I'm talking about grammar, I really literally, I don't mean it as to replace English. I hope that we will end up with actually really new, interesting grammatical units inside English and other languages, because there's all kinds of ontological things that we just don't represent in our languages, that if we had other units, we would be much less confused. And there's grammatics that we use in our language that makes us very confused. And just in case you want to go down the rabbit hole of that, read about E prime. Right? This is one of the big problems of most languages is the use of the verb to be. So I hope that drops out of language. But really what I'm talking about much more is the grammars of social organisms. Like I see DNA as a grammar. It's a grammar that the expressions in the language of DNA are living organisms. Each one of us is a sentence or a story or a narrative in this grammar that DNA can hold, and we're a big story that was written out in that grammar. So, and that's at one level. There's like there's all kinds of levels where this notion of a grammatic capacity, I think, holds true. And I use the word grammar only because it's the one that we have really close relation to in speaking. But literally, games have grammars, art has grammar, culture has grammar. The ways in which cells interact with each other on hormonal interactions is according to a grammar, right? They are actually words in a language that allows certain kinds of messages to go. Neurons speak a grammar that allow animals to come into existence. Neurons are about long-distance communication across coordinating bodies. So it's like a very interesting grammar, the way that axon potentials travel across nerves, and that is a grammatical capacity that creates a whole nother kind of possibility in the world. So I'm really, I know it's a little abstract, but to me it's really, really important.
No, it makes complete sense to me, actually.
Yeah, great. Yeah, great. So it's grammatical capacities the whole way down.
Right, because it makes sense to me because of the sort of patterns I see very often in speaking visually. You know, you have your sort of basic forms, and then everything else is a sort of, how do you say, like expanding or finding all of the different variations of those forms. And there's, once you have your square, your circle, your line, after that, the human mind just goes blah, goes completely berserk, and we can't. I hope maybe with DADA we can have a better way of how do you say, like this, finding a way to make sure all of that is accounted for in some way. But it makes complete sense to me.
In fact, actually, that's part of why I'm so excited about the space that you all are exploring, which is you're using art as a way to get in. Like I think in the context of art, there is a level of expressivity that will identify grammatical units that we don't think of in language, because language is so much about subject, predicate, object. Whereas it sounds to me like you all are actually learning things about how to coordinate and come into action around using visual art as part of the element of grammatics. So I'm really curious about musicians doing the same thing too, because for the most part, music has been non-representational. But if we were to include music in our representational capacities, it could integrate emotions with representation in a way that I think would be really, really interesting. And so for me, like what it feels like is going to happen as we get these new grammatic capacities that come online that actually make for DNA for social organisms instead of DNA for biological organisms, is the experience of humans in that space will be some talking, some dancing, some drawing, some something else, arranging, like, in fact, actually, I'm quite sure that what we'll be doing is we'll be using some kind of tree structures to arrange and see things inside of tree structures, because so much of reality seems to be organized that way in actual hierarchical structures, natural hierarchies. And that we'll be doing all kinds of representational arranging and understanding of things inside those structures. And I'm saying that from the position of somebody seeing writing who doesn't know how to write. It's just like an intuition about the future. Oh, if only we could get this down in some kind of little symbol. I don't know what that'll look like, but I think it's like that, and that'll be a grammatic capacity for social organisms.
Yeah, I mean, for me, what you're talking about a lot has a kind of like aspect of film to it, because in film you're able to put together words and images, but the problem with film is it's so awkward because it requires so much input to create this frame, and what I think of in a DADA and especially in a possible environment with Holochain is that all of that would be film as we conceive of it, but a living film. You know, it would
that's
be alive,
exciting.
And those things, those connections can be made between the dance and the sound, and like more of those connections can actually be made instead of just them, and not necessarily like labeled and locked away in a little box, but actually constantly transforming it and moving forward. Because the film is like you do it, it's done, it's a sequence, it's a program, and it's linear, and then you're done. You've got a beginning, middle, and end. And if it's a living organism, it has no beginning, middle, and end. It's just a continuous evolution. So yeah, it's exciting for me to hear you express the possibility of that becoming of film becoming a living organism as opposed to stuck in celluloid for generations to come.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great metaphor, and really there's a lot of possibility inside there. And now what I'm curious is, what's the adjacent possible for that media?
Yeah.
That'll be fun to play with.
I mean, jazz in so many ways is like that. Is that, you know, like you're playing, musicians playing together. It's that's living, but you just can't see it because it's abstract, like you're saying. And
jazz musicians have an incredible sense of the grammar. They are the ones who learn the grammar of musical structure the best, because they got to be able to do it on the fly. It's really cool.
And intuitive, yes, intuitive. Yeah.
Cool. And we always say that what happens on the DADA platform is like a jazz improvisation. It's really kind of like that. So there's something there.
Cool.
In terms of
Thank you so much for sharing, for listening, and for sharing.
Yeah,
Mark, you wanted to say something?
I had a last thought. I was kind of inspired by what Ilan was talking about, and we've talked a lot about conversation and the grammar of that. But although indirectly, what Ilan was getting at, we don't talk about telling stories and developing a story, and what does that actually mean to do that, and how do you actually do that? You know, how you combine those components and pieces together. You know, the film analogies is great, but the idea of an open-ended story that may go somewhere, may not go somewhere. You know, what is the plot? You know, what is the point? What are the MacGuffins? You know, it's how does that thing fit together? But it's just a word I'd not heard anybody here use. Is that we talk about having conversations, but a great conversation becomes a story itself. Some of them go nowhere, they disappear, they get lost in memory, whatever. But a lot of the really great ones become a story that we remember. You know, so maybe there's something in that idea.
You just explained what we do on DADA, precisely that.
Yeah.
Well, but did you notice also, Mark?
I'm new to this, so.
I found it really fun, Mark. You actually you identified a couple grammatic elements. You said plot. You said MacGuffin. Right? Those are grammars of storytelling. And how deep and strong is our grammar? And this is why jazz is awesome. It's like we know we're all playing in this key. We know what we can do to move to the next key or this other key or not. You can hear it on the fly, and there's this grammar that allows us to play together and move and explore a space. And I think that in storytelling, that there's all kinds of interesting grammatics that allow us to explore the space of narrative, and therefore also the narrative that we're telling ourselves about reality, about where we're going, about where we came from. And how, I don't know if the word is suggest, I would wonder, at least I'm curious, I think maybe that the degree to which we understand the grammar of all this stuff is the degree to which we can tell really rich stories and hold them in mind, because we share a grammar that helps us share that particular aspect in mind.
And for other people's benefit, if they're not aware of a MacGuffin, it is something that is important to the components of the story, but not necessarily to anybody else outside of it. It makes the story work. So
it's what creates suspense, according to Hitchcock. But I think that in terms of storytelling, where we need more help is with the invisible economy, because it's such a complex thing, and no one seems to, I mean, not no one, but not everybody gets it. It's hard for people to understand. The grammar of, like here in the United States, of capitalism is so ingrained that everybody uses words that we go like, it's frustrating to us because they say, oh, it's like charity. No. Or it's like volunteering. Or no. Or it's like basic income part of, I mean, it's like we need to probably, I think, become, I don't know, fashion a better way to tell that story.
Well, it's by experience, no? You can't tell it.
Yeah, and you kind of need to experience it in order to get it in a way. Although Eric seems to have
well, but they have their parallel
yeah.
universe.
Right.
We're preaching to the core and vice versa.
Yes, exactly.
In that regard, have you all looked at this one? So if you're talking about economy, well, the whole reason that we did Holochain is because we're actually interested in currencies. And currencies is about the flow of currents, being able to see currents. And we actually understand the world of, again, the grammar of the current currency that's available in the monetary system. It's all the way at the very bottom left of the grammatics of living systems model. And so to bring in a system that allows us to represent real wealth at all these different levels requires us to have representational capacities that move beyond rational numbers in our embodied systems for building wealth together. So the reason why Holochain exists is because we're doing this. This is where we're getting to. And you can't do this well if you have a system in which the representation, the writing down of value, the current C is written in a way that's enclosed. So we had to create for ourselves an unenclosable carrier. But then once we have that, then we can actually start down the path of being able to represent this stuff. And so when I was reading The Invisible Economy, I was like, yeah, exactly. You guys are looking at all these other levels of living systems model of wealth, and the ways in which we represent value for each one of these things in living models of wealth is different at each one. You have to use different types of tokens. It can't just be rational numbers. You have to use nominals and cardinals and ordinals, and then you actually have to talk about all these different levels of how you do that systemically. But so just when you mentioned that, I'm like, yep, this is exactly right. And that is hard. It's really hard to get people out of the bottom left box because that's all about speculative wealth. It's super, super hard to jump out of that box.
Yeah, it's incredible how people just doesn't even, like, it's hard to, yeah. it's almost like you can't see anything beyond these structures, and if you question it, then people go back to human nature, right? Like the argument is like, well, human nature is this and that, and that's why you get those results. It's super interesting. I gave up. I can't. Yeah. No,
Maybe
because
to-
I want to move forward. I don't want to be like looking back. It's like.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just thinking we call them intangible, right? And then I'm like, why do we call them intangible? They're pretty tangible to me.
No.
Like what people feel, or the kind of, I mean, it's not intangible. It's tangible emotionally. It's tangible. It has like, benefits that you can, So I understand why we use the word. I'm a writer, so I'm also a little bit worried sometimes when people get into the fever of changing the names of everything, because there's a part of language that is efficient and works well for certain things. But yeah, I mean, if you think about it, maybe calling it intangible doesn't do it a good service, because then people think, well, if it's intangible, where's the value in it, right? It has some sort of negative connotation. It's tangible that your heart jumps when you see a drawing. It's tangible that you now have new friends, or whatever it is that we're doing.
It's true.
That is not money.
It's only because it can be measured, right? That we call it intangible.
Yeah, well, the root word is to touch. Tange is from touch. And so, Judy, you're 100% right. We are touched so deep, so much more deeply by the things that we don't feel with our fingers. We are still deeply touched by them.
Maybe we should call it super tangible. Tangible and super tangible. Cool. This has been such a great talk. Thank you, Eric. My mind is blown. That's all I can say.
Well, it's a great pleasure. I'm really excited by all the work you all are doing. And I would like to keep the conversation flowing. I'm available for answering questions. And I feel like I have a lot to learn from you all, because I think you all are actually doing some of the most important real work of figuring out what these grammars are like and how it actually works in this world. And that's really hard. And so it's interesting that I think we do have to jump in from this high angle to actually form the patterns that will work. So I'm really excited by it. Thank you.
No, thank you so much for giving us a guideline. I mean, we have to go back and see what the hell is this, but it's very exciting.
Yeah, move to the adjacent possibles.
Very good. And Jakob, if you have anything you want to share, or you want to ask questions, or you want to jump into things, you know how to reach me. I'm totally available.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Eric.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
It's amazing. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Gracias, chao.